My name is Margaret Lane, and I am 76 years old. This house on Sycamore Street wasn't just a home. It was my monument. I still remember the day the realtor handed me the keys. Ethan, my son, was 13 at the time. His eyes wide with wonder. He walked through the doorway as if stepping into a dream. "Is this really our house?" "Mom," he asked, running his hand along the wooden staircase. "Yes, sweetie," I said, blinking back tears. "It's ours." I had bought it on my own. No husband. No financial help. Just years of working retail. Saving. Investing little by little. After my husband, Henry, ran off with his secretary, I was left with a child and a mortgage. No alimony. No support. Just me. That's when I made a promise to myself I would never depend on anyone again. I took a job at a large department store in Asheville as a merchandiser. Not glamorous, but stable. Over the years, I worked my way up, learned to budget, to invest. By the time I turned 45, the house was paid off. By 60, I could have retired, but I didn't. I stayed for the routine, the connection, the quiet satisfaction of earning my keep. Ethan never knew how much I'd saved. Nobody did. Not my coworkers. Not my neighbors. And certainly not Ethan. After what I'd been through with Henry, I learned that some things, especially financial things, were best kept private. That house became more than shelter. It was where I raised Ethan. Where I planted roses and hosted tea with friends. Where I celebrated small wins. It held our memories. Our growing pains. Or quiet triomphe. But I didn't know that 38 years after Ethan first called it our house, he would turn around and ask me to leave it like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. And that, right there, was the beginning of the end. Ethan met Vanessa 5 years ago. She worked in the same insurance firm. All sharp suits and polished nails. The kind of woman who always smiled without warmth. The kind who remembered your birthday, but never your name. They dated for 6 months. Then, without much fanfare, they got married, small ceremony. Chain restaurant reception. Honeymoon in Myrtle Beach. 3 weeks after they returned, they came over for Sunday lunch. I'd made roast chicken. Ethan's favorite. Vanessa barely touched her plate. "Margaret," she said sweetly, laying a manicured hand over mine. "This house is really too big for just one person." Ethan chimed in. "Yeah. Mom, we're spending a fortune on rent. We could move in. Help out around here. Save for a down payment." I should have paused. Should have asked myself why this suddenly seemed so urgent. But I didn't. I said yes. Because it was Ethan. My boy. The same boy who once couldn't sleep without my humming through the door. They moved in the next week. At first, things felt good. Ethan fixed things around the house that had long annoyed me: leaky faucets, squeaky stairs. Vanessa made dinner once or twice when I worked late at the store. We watched television together. Laughed over game shows. It felt like having a family again. But little shifts started creeping in. First, Vanessa rearranged the living room. She said it looked more modern this way. Then, my photographs disappeared. Slowly. Silently. Replaced by porcelain figurines I'd never seen before. Next came the garden. My garden. Vanessa hired a landscaping crew to update the space. My roses were ripped out. My dahlias. Gone. "Mom. No offense," Ethan said, glancing at the fresh mulch and gravel walkways. "But it was looking a bit, old lady." I didn't argue. I just nodded and went back inside. The house that had once held my memories now held theirs. My voice grew keener. My space smaller. One day, I came home early from the grocery store and found Vanessa going through my dresser. She didn't even flinch. "Oh, just looking for some old photos," she said breezily. "Wanted to show my mom." I knew she was lying, and I knew deep down that something in this house had started to rot. And it wasn't the plumbing. The changes didn't stop, they multiplied. My books disappeared from the living room shelves, packed into boxes and shoved into the garage to make space for Vanessa's curated collection of modern paperbacks and decorative bowls. My vintage china was declared too old-fashioned and replaced with white porcelain sets from some sleek kitchen catalog. Even my car, a perfectly fine Buick I'd had for over a decade, became a problem. "Mom, seriously," Ethan said one morning, staring at it in the driveway. "That thing is ruining the whole look of the house. Why don't you sell it already? You hardly drive." I reminded him I drove to the grocery store, to the doctor, to church. "You could just ask me for a ride," he replied, as if he were offering a favor and not taking away the last bit of freedom I had left. But I knew better. I started locking my bedroom door when I left the house. It wasn't much a simple twist lock, but it gave me the illusion of privacy. "Vanessa noticed," she told Ethan. That evening, over dinner, he looked at me with tight lips and a furrowed brow. "Mom, do you not trust us?" I didn't look up from my knitting. "I like my privacy." He let out a sharp exhale. "It's weird. We're a family. We shouldn't be keeping secrets." I almost laughed. If only he knew the kind of secrets I'd kept. He didn't know about the investment accounts, the CDs, the 2 small properties I'd quietly sold off years ago. He didn't know that this woman he now called Burden once juggled spreadsheets and stock tickers while tucking him in with lullabies. But it was becoming clear he didn't care to know. I was now a guest in my own home, a tolerated inconvenience. At dinner, they barely looked at me. Conversations swirled around weekend getaways and new phones and work gossip. Vanessa stopped calling me Mom, or even Margaret. I was now just a presence. "Can you pass the salt?" she asked one night. No eye contact. No warmth. On my 75th birthday, they went away for the weekend. Left a card on the kitchen table with a grocery store box of chocolates. No dinner. No candle. No hug. Just a note, "We'll celebrate when we get back." We never did. It happened one afternoon in early spring. I was sitting in the garden, what was left of it, sipping tea and letting the sun warm my face. Through the open kitchen window, I heard them talking. Vanessa's voice was as smooth as ever. "How much longer do you think she'll last?" I froze. "Don't say that," Ethan replied. But he didn't sound angry, just uncomfortable. "I'm being practical," she continued. "She's 76. Ethan, the house is fully paid off. When she's gone, it'll be yours." Silence. Then Ethan's voice. Hesitant. "Maybe we could talk to her. Suggest a nursing home. It's not safe for her to live alone anyway." My hands shook. They were planning my future without me. Talking about my life like a broken chair, to be quietly discarded. The following week, Vanessa began leaving brochures on the coffee table. Sunset Grove, Willow Creek, assisted living, full care, memory services. One evening at dinner, she smiled across the table and said, "My Aunt Martha just moved into Sunset Grove. She loves it. So clean. So peaceful." "How old is she?" I asked, sipping my tea. 83. "I see," I replied. "Does she have health issues?" "Some arthritis. A little dementia." "How interesting. I have neither." Ethan cleared his throat, eyes fixed on his plate. Mom! No one's saying you need to go now. We're just thinking ahead. Thinking ahead. I echoed. About your future or mine? The silence that followed said everything. The next night, they sat me down in the living room. Mom, Ethan began. We need to talk seriously. I nodded. This house is too big. You need care. We can't live like this forever. Care, I asked. I make my own appointments. Pay my own bills. Cook my own meals. Vanessa jumped in. But you're forgetful. You leave the stove on. You lose track of time. I narrowed my eyes. That's not true. And you know it. She's in denial. Vanessa muttered to Ethan. That was the moment I stood up and said clearly, I'll move out. Vanessa's eyes lit up. Really? Yes. I nodded. But the house stays in my name. I'm not signing anything over. Their joy withered. What's the point? Then Vanessa asked, frowning. You want me out? Fine. But the house is mine. You may live here. But one day, I will sell it. That's not fair. Ethan said. We've taken care of you for years? I let out a dry laugh. Taken care of me. You erased me. You pushed me out of my own home. And now that I'm not useful, you want to claim what's mine. Vanessa's mask cracked. You selfish old woman. I looked her in the eye and said quietly, I raised my son alone. Bought this house on my own. And I will leave it on my own terms. They had their answer. And I had my plan. They didn't believe I'd really go. For the next few days, Vanessa walked around with a smug little smile, while Ethan avoided eye contact entirely. Maybe they thought I'd change my mind. Maybe they assumed I had nowhere else to go. They had no idea who they were dealing with. In that week, I met with my lawyer. I revised my will. Just to be sure, I sat with my financial advisor, Mr. Ellsworth, who I'd worked with quietly for over a decade. We restructured some accounts, liquidated a few assets, updated a trust. I toured apartments, downtown, modern, safe, with concierge service, security, and river views. I signed the lease by Thursday. Friday, I called a cab. I packed only what mattered: my books, my tea set, a few cherished photographs. Everything else could stay. As I wheeled my suitcase to the door, Ethan finally spoke. Wait, you're actually leaving? Yes, I said, slipping on my coat. I'll leave the keys on the hallway table. But, where are you going? He looked baffled. Nervous. To my new home. A nursing home? Vanessa asked. Almost hopeful. I smiled sweetly. No. A luxury apartment at Riverstone Plaza. They stared at me. That place costs a fortune. Vanessa gasped. I'm aware, I replied. And I can afford it. Ethan looked like someone had slapped him with a wet dishcloth. How? I shrugged. I worked. I saved. I invested. You never asked? But you were a merchandiser. He stammered. And very good at it. The cab pulled up. The driver stepped out to help with my luggage. I turned to Ethan. The utility bill is due next week. Don't forget. Wait. He grabbed my arm, lowering his voice. If you've got money, maybe we can talk about the house. About us. About a plan. I gently pulled my arm free. It's too late for that. You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. And then I left. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. As the cab pulled away, I looked ahead at the skyline, my pulse steady, my chest light. The driver glanced in the mirror. "Where to?" "Ma'am." "Riverstone Plaza," I said. "And let's stop by the bank first. I've got an appointment with my financial advisor." It was the first time in years that my life felt completely, deliciously mine. My apartment at Riverstone Plaza was everything. The old house had stopped being bright. Modern. Peaceful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the river. The kitchen gleamed with stainless steel. There was a concierge who greeted me by name, and a secure parking space that would soon house something special. For the first few days, I just breathed. No one scolded me for leaving the television too loud. No one tossed my leftovers. No one rearranged my belongings. I was alone. But I wasn't lonely. Ellen, my oldest friend and one of the few who hadn't vanished over time, came to visit. She stepped into the apartment, and her mouth fell open. "Margaret Lane," she said, eyes wide. "You're living in a magazine ad." We laughed over tea, the good china I'd brought with me catching the afternoon light. "You could have done this years ago," Ellen said gently. I shrugged. I kept thinking I needed permission. From who? Everyone but me. She was quiet for a beat, then smiled. "So, now what?" It was a good question. I didn't want to just exist. I wanted to live. "Ellen," I said, swirling honey into my tea. "Do you remember that old dream we had? The one we shelved behind motherhood and work and bills?" She blinked. "The road trip. To the coast." I nodded. "Cliffs. Little harbors. Seafood we can't pronounce." "You're serious." "Dead serious." She grinned. "Only one condition." "What's that?" "We're not going in your Buick." I sold it. She gasped. "What are we taking?" "A red Porsche," I said, watching her eyes widen. "You bought a Porsche." "Not yet. But I'm going to." And I did. With the help of Mr. Ellsworth. I walked into a dealership that weekend. I picked out a fiery red Carrera with sleek lines and leather seats. The young man showing me the options blinked when I said I wanted to pay in full. The next day, I picked it up, slipped behind the wheel, and for the first time in decades, maybe ever, I felt electric. That car wasn't about speed. It was about choice. About boldness. About no longer asking for space but taking it. People stared. Let them. I was 76 years old and finally driving the road I chose literally and metaphorically, and I wasn't slowing down. It was a week after the move when the intercom buzzed. "Mrs. Lane," the concierge said. "You have visitors, Mr. and Mrs. Lane." "Ethan and Vanessa." He hesitated. Part of me wanted to pretend I wasn't home. But I knew this moment would come. Better on my terms. In my space. "Send them up." They arrived dressed like they were heading to a board meeting, Ethan in a stiff blazer. Vanessa in a muted designer knockoff. "Mom," Ethan said as he stepped in. "You look well." "I am well," I replied, offering a polite smile. "Tea." Vanessa's eyes swept the apartment like a realtor scoping comps. "This is beautiful." "It is." We sat. They didn't touch the tea. Ethan cleared his throat. "We're worried. About you. About all this. The move. The car. It just seems sudden." I sipped my tea slowly. "You mean reckless?" "Mom," he said, softening his voice. "We just want you to be safe." "I am." Safer than I ever was in that house. Vanessa shifted forward. We talked, and if you wanted, you could come home. We'd make changes. Give you back your bedroom. We'll do better. I tilted my head. Why now? Silence. I continued. You didn't care much when I was sleeping in the study, or when you forgot my birthday. Ethan looked down. Vanessa tried again. We made mistakes. Okay, but we're still your family. And what does family mean to you? I asked gently. Because for me, it used to mean love, support, showing up. Vanessa pursed her lips. You're twisting everything. We only wanted what was best for you. No, I said, setting my cup down. You wanted what was best for you. And when I no longer served that, I became an inconvenience. Ethan opened his mouth. But I raised my hand. I'm not angry anymore. But I see clearly now. You wanted the house. Not me. And when you saw that I had something more than you expected, you came running. That's not true, Ethan said quietly. Maybe not entirely. I allowed. Maybe part of you does care. But the rest. I looked at Vanessa. Calculating. Vanessa didn't deny it. Just stared at me coldly. I stood. I'll always be your mother. Ethan. That won't change. But I won't be manipulated. I won't go back. So. What? Vanessa snapped. You're cutting us out of your life. No. But I'm setting boundaries. You can visit. We can talk. But the house stays mine. My money stays mine. My life is mine. Vanessa went pale. Ethan stood. Shoulders slumped. I understand, he said. I hope so, I replied. They left in silence. And I, for the first time in a long time, felt peace settle in like an old friend. The months that followed were the richest of my life. I donated part of my savings to a scholarship fund for single mothers returning to college. Quietly. No press release. Just a check, and a wish that it might ease someone else's burden, the way I once wished someone could ease mine. I still saw Ethan on my terms. We met for lunch once a week. Without Vanessa, he didn't ask about the house again. He didn't mention inheritance. Sometimes we laughed like we used to. Other times, we sat quietly, both trying to repair something too deeply cracked to ever be quite whole again. That was okay. I wasn't trying to go back. I was trying to go forward. My watercolor paintings, little river scenes and old windows in bloom, were displayed at a local gallery. To my shock, a few even sold. At the book club, we laughed over Dickens and swooned over Austen. Harrison, the antique dealer, became a regular part of my days. We weren't romantic. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But we shared stories, walks, and music. And that was enough. Ellen, true to her word, bought a scooter. Seafoam green. She zipped around Birmingham like a rebellious teen. Camera slung over her shoulder. We were planning our next road trip this time. To the Highlands of Scotland. One morning, as I stood at the window watching the sun rise over the river, I caught my reflection in the glass. Silver hair. Clear eyes. A small, satisfied smile. I was no longer just a mother, or a widow, or a woman clinging to what once was. I was Margaret Lane. Artist. Traveler. Driver of a red Porsche. And finally, free.